Dr. Asha Subramaniam.
This call is now being recorded.
She holds a MSTEC, that is Master in Statistics, from Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta, and a PhD in Data Science from IIIT Bangalore. Her research interests include knowledge representation and reasoning models, semantic web, machine learning, and graph networks, particularly focusing on developing unique models that can bring all these technology domains together to better understand data and its context. Currently, as founder and CEO of Semantic Web India Private Limited, on a mission to develop and harness self-learning knowledge graphs from raw data that can generate useful insights on a variety of domains, especially for the Indian context. Asha has a rich information technology industry background with over 2 decades of program management and delivery experience. That is so great, ma'am, to be here with you. And because you have already worked in semantic technologies a lot, it will be very fortunate enough to listen to you. Over to you, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sarika, for giving me this opportunity to present in this particular forum. I also feel extremely privileged and honored to be sharing the platform with very experienced and accomplished academicians such as Professor PSK, P. Srinivasa Kumar from IIT Madras. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the audience here. You've been such wonderful audience. I've been attending all the talks, and I've seen the kind of questions you all have put up. I'm going to make a sincere effort. I've actually marked most of your questions, and I'm going to make a sincere effort to answer as many of those questions as I can today. I would also be making this session very interactive and informative for you all. Now, I represent the industry, right? So my focus is going to be a lot on the application side of semantic web, as my title suggests. So today I have split my talk roughly in 2 parts. The first part, roughly about 45 minutes, I'll be setting the stage for semantic web applications. What are the components of a semantic web application? I'll be taking you through the global canvas of all the applications from the industry, including research. What does it take to build industry scale applications? And finally, the second part of my talk is going to be a lot about what we do in the organization that I head, Semantic Web India. I think, let me just do a quick check. I know I am audible and visible, but I just want to do a quick check before I proceed. So am I audible enough, and are my slides visible?
Perfect.
Okay, good. I would request the audience to hold on to all your questions till the end of the session. I promise I will leave about 10 to 15 minutes for the questions. I'll answer as many as I can. And we are going to be having a very interactive session today. There are going to be some interactive polls and all that. So you might want to keep your mobile phones ready. In case you are attending this session using a mobile phone, then maybe just try to switch over, or if you have a laptop in front of you, you can even access the poll questions on your browser. So let's start. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. I'll take you through semantic web in a nutshell. Most of it might be repeating from whatever you've seen, but just to cement what all we have learned. And why is semantic web so important, right? We will dwell a bit on this. Then we will go over the components of a semantic web application, having tried to include as much visuals as possible. Examples of some real life applications from the industry, what is happening in research in semantic web. Hopefully it will motivate a huge lot from you today in the audience to pursue some research in semantic web. And finally, a lot of time on what we are working on at Semantic Web India. So we all know semantic web is a web of knowledge. It's machine readable, right? And you can see I have included a very brief example. I've picked it up from DBpedia. If you remember, the speakers from the previous sessions told you that all the information on Wikipedia has been converted into a semantic knowledge base, and that's called DBpedia. And so here I have just picked up a few nodes from there. Node India. Actually, if you type in that URL, you will reach the node in DBpedia. And you can see that India is connected to another resource, another entity called New Delhi, and the property that is connecting India and New Delhi is capital. Similarly, you have another property connecting to Indian rupee. So it's about the semantic web is about making statements or facts about objects and concepts in the world. They are very simple tuples of the form subject, predicate, object. So in the first example, India is the subject. Your dbpedia.org/ontology capital is the predicate, and New Delhi is the object. Now, both your subject and object are URIs, unique resource identifiers. It means that there is only one resource in the whole of web that defines India in the namespace of DBpedia in this manner. That's what it means. That's a unique URL. And that's what distinguishes semantic web from other forms of knowledge representation. Semantic web has when you publish something on the web, on semantic web, you need to follow some publishing standard. We have heard a lot about it. We have heard about formalisms such as RDF, RDFS, OWL, and so on. What do? They actually add interoperability, right? So HTML is an interoperable technology whereby whatever web page that you create, any application, any OS, any machine that you are trying to access, you're able to see the contents of HTML, right? It's exactly the same way. You define your objects and predicates and subjects in a manner that it's interoperable and it is consistent. So the biggest advantage of semantic web is, of course, information retrieval and data integration. And we will see why, right? We will see examples of why. Why is this so important, right? It is important because, as you can see, I have picked up a very small, brief example. Suppose we are an organization which generates a lot of lab experiments data. So what happens in a lab experiment? You have a sample, and then you have some data set, you have observations, you have some measurements. They've been reported by someone. Now, there are tons and tons of lab experiments that are happening throughout the organization. How do I connect all these? Because definitely a few lab experiments might be connected to each other in the sense that they might be working on similar samples, or they might have been, they might have used the same chemical for testing or something. It could have been generated by the same department. Now it's a humongous process to even try to integrate this kind of information in an organization. But what semantic web can do, as you can see, there's a mapping layer, and this example comes from a biomedical domain. So these lab experiments are actually pertaining to some biomedical experiments. So you can see I'm having different ontologies, maybe a disease ontology, some open biomedical ontologies that define a sample and observation and so on and so forth. So they're all terms that you're using from these ontologies to represent the data that you've collected, in your either your tables or some CSV files that represent the lab experiments data. And what really happens is they all miraculously get connected. You can see there is a knowledge graph that has gotten created by just linking these entities to some known unique resource identifiers from those vocabularies. And now what I can do is I can suddenly do a lot of inferencing. I can reason new facts. I can say that if this chemical has this reaction, and if that reaction actually results in the third reaction, I can assume that if I'm using this chemical and this is the environment, then I can expect the third reaction. Not only that, if there are other departments which have denoted the lab experiment data using the same ontologies, then suddenly all these applications start talking to each other, right? And your search becomes much more simpler. We have seen so many examples where people have shown us example of how to do an ontology-based search, how I can convert a natural language, type English to figure out. So I can say how many lab experiments were conducted on, say, the cancer gene, right? And I can actually write a query like that, and from all these experiments, it can retrieve that those experiments that dealt with the breast cancer gene, for example. so that's why this technology is so important, because you start to move around your data pieces as though they know what, as though internally each data piece knows what I am, what my role is in the big picture, and how I can connect to other entities that I'm related to. Most importantly, look at the last point. It decouples data from metadata, or data about data. When you decouple it, what does it mean? It means that the people who are best suited, or the domain experts who are best suited to explain those data points, for example, people who know about gene organizations and gene symbols, and specific genes which affect certain diseases, then those people can take over building the knowledge base about genes. As long as I connect my data to that particular gene symbol from that vocabulary, I can get all the information that I want in the world about that particular resource. That's what it means. Now, I tried to, there were a lot of questions by the audience in the last few days as to, we're all very comfortable working with RDBMSs. Why has, how does semantic web make any difference? And what role does it have to play? I think yesterday, Dr. Sumit did answer it in a beautiful way. And Professor PSK had, augmented that fact that you decide what is the kind of application that what is the kind of business questions that you're trying to answer from your application. So let's kind of build that question, right? So on the right side is your RDBMS world. I am building a very simple application. I'm saying there are some states, they're identified by some ID. Each state ID has got a name, it's got a population capital, there's a chief minister for the state. Now each state has got multiple districts, and each state could also has multiple indicators. These indicators could be education indicators such as literacy, health indicators such as infant mortality rate, etc. So which period has this indicator been collected, and what is the value of that indicator, right? So now see what is happening. So I'm trying to build something very similar in the semantic website, and let's try to understand this, because it contains everything that you have learned or heard from people over the last few days. First of all, this part where I am defining how I want to organize my data in the semantic web world, it's called T-box, the terminology box. Here, I define a state class. You've seen how to do that in Prodigy, right? Dr. Raghava explained that pretty much in detail. So I create a state class. I create all my entities. So I know these are my applications, right? These are my objects in my application, a state, a district, an indicator, and so on. So I create the state. I say that, I try to find out in what all ways does a state relate to my other objects in the application, or other keywords in the application. So, so all your nodes form the key terms in your domain, and all the relationships between these objects in the domain are defined by the relationship. So all these arrows, and on top of the arrow, the text that I have written is the relationship. So a state has a city. A state is connected to a city, and that city relationship is the capital. So has capital relationship connects the state to a city in that particular state. State has a CM, and state has an indicator, state has district. Now you also see that the properties are different. There are certain properties which are object properties. There are certain properties that are data properties. And I think this was explained. I've tried to put this in a visual form. So those properties that connect to object nodes are termed as object properties, and those properties that connect to a literal value are termed as data properties. So here, the ones in the rectangular boxes, so abbreviation is actually a string. For example, name is a string, population is a number. So these are data properties. And you can see that indicator has a type. And so creating an ontology might look simple, but actually it is not. A lot of effort goes into spending time on how should I design my ontology, and how should I create it. Now, in the semantic web world, a lot of reuse is encouraged. Why? Because a lot of people have spent years of efforts trying to build an ontology design in a particular domain. For example, we already have an ontology called SCOS, which is part of the linked open data cloud. It stands for Simple Knowledge Organization System. So if you have any concepts or terms which have to be organized in a hierarchical fashion, SCOS is the one to be used. And the reason in this particular case I have used indicator has type, the type object that you see, it is a subclass of SCOS, is because I envisaged, or in this particular case, I can easily create a hierarchy of my indicators. I can say that there is a sector called education, and education has got indicators like literacy and stuff like that. You have health domain where you have indicators like infant mortality rate. So actually, I'm trying to form a hierarchy of indicators. So that's why I picked that up. Similarly, look at the property called has_cn. There, I use schema.org person because chief minister is a person, is a human being, and why should I create a new class called person when already I have schema.org person? And so how do I know, when I say that your design has to be interoperable? The other day we spoke about how do you ensure that your ontology is well accepted in this community. There's a concept of getting 5-star in your ontology. How do you get that? It has to follow certain formalism, and those formalisms are defined by vocabularies such as RDF, RDFS, and OWL. They're all varying degrees of formalism that add expressiveness to whatever work you're doing. And I think this was beautifully explained by Dr. Uma during her ISRO talk, right? So as you can see, you can see RDFS subclass of this is because the subclass of property comes from the RDFS vocabulary. OWL, equivalent class, is a brilliant, it's a very useful property that actually links two concepts from two different ontologies. So DBpedia person is equivalent to schema.org person. What does it mean? It means that if I have instances of person in DBpedia, like say Prime Minister Narendra Modi or any such things like that, then those instances, then I know that this particular entity is actually in domain terms same as a schema person. How does it, how do people use it? So in fact, I don't remember who did this, but when you search on Google, right, when you search a restaurant or a person or a place, the moment you type it, it actually tells you that if it is a restaurant, it's understood it's a restaurant, it will tell you that this restaurant offers this menu and this is the way it is rated. Whereas if it is showing you information about a person, it will say that this person was born such and such time, had spouse and all that. So it offers you a contextual information in a manner as though the machine has understood exactly what you're saying. And this comes from the way you have defined that particular node. So I hope I have been able to explain the T-box properly. Let's go further. So I have now populated my database, right? Look at my RDBMS, I've populated some rows, and this is how the A-box gets populated. And you can see that your T-box and A-box now form what is called the knowledge base. And in the RDBMS world, it's called the database, right? It's a collection of all these tables. Now let's look at the A-box very carefully. Can you see those yellow highlights? That URL is very important. So Bengaluru is a well-defined URL. It's a unique resource locator for in whichever domain space that you've defined. Say, for example, I have defined the domain space of all states of India. Then Bengaluru is the definition in that particular namespace. So, so as you can see, the instance is connected to its class by the RDF type property. Here you can see indicator 1 has a type called literacy, and that is of type that is a type of this type class here. Right. So now why do I, so if I were to ask you in this application, which is better? Should I go in for a semantic web representation or should I go in for an RDBMS representation? Right. Now, there are certain advantages of doing it in the semantic web, as you can very easily see, right? Let's see. Number one, if I had, so suppose I had a department in a government organization, they are creating some database like this. So they will have umpteen number of databases which are defining states in their own way. Some states will have an ID for a state ID, some will call name, some other department might call it by abbreviation and whatever. So if two departments in a government organization wanted to consolidate their application, one is having all the data about, you know, the say for example the health indicators. Say the health and family welfare department is having all the details about the from the health sector side, and there is some other department, say the education department, which is having all the data related to the number of schools in all the districts of India. We just want to have a consolidated database. Can you see how hard it is? We don't even know what columns have been used, and that's why, you know, in the software industry, you would have heard of terms like data warehouse, data lakes, and all that, where you build an additional layer to actually form a summarized database from all this, and then there is a night job that runs, and, you know, it goes and updates these, and then the senior management get their reports out of it. Imagine if now I don't refer to Karnataka as that string of 9 characters, I refer to Karnataka as that URL here, which is defining here. It defines Karnataka, and all the problems are solved. Miraculously, any number of applications across departments will start talking to each other. And that's what I meant by interoperable applications and reducing the data silos. Also, there are some, the main aim or the main advantage is to be able to harness the data semantics. The moment I type, if I type Karnataka, and it is your program or machine is able to disambiguate the term Karnataka to that URL Karnataka, then suddenly it knows a lot about Karnataka. It knows that it is one of the southern India states, that it has Tamil Nadu, it borders with Tamil Nadu. There's so many things that suddenly, it knows that, say, IIIT Bangalore is an institute within Karnataka, and so many such information is suddenly available to us. So this is, I hope, this solves the dilemma for you to some extent. So what is the role of semantic web in the data science canvas, right? Let's understand. So there's a lot of raw data. We have all these AI, ML, algorithms. I've tried to put everything inside. It need not really be deep learning. We can even have a small data processing algorithm or an analytics to actually, convert this data into some, useful information, right? So, but anyways, your data goes to a lot of processing. Ultimately, what are we doing, right? Whether you are applying a host of AI or ML algorithms, you are understanding the patterns and you are trying to predict some outcomes. And these outcomes actually provide a lot of intelligence to a variety of industries, right? So this is, at the core, this is what is happening. And in the process, it's not so simple, because when the outcomes come out, there's a set of domain experts who look at the outcomes. They then try to refine the algorithm, or they augment the input that is going in. And then again, the results get even more filtered and better than the previous thing. So where does semantic web fit in? Semantic web fits right here. As you can see, it is a part of your, it blends beautifully in the processing. It's a part of data science. I have created, if you can see, I have created deliberately an overlap between the domain and here. So because semantic web's job is to semi-automate the domain. See, you can never have a system that can completely replace a human being, right? We all understand that. So, but it can substantially reduce the understanding of that domain. And we have seen how beautifully Dr. Fani, and Professor PSK in the morning sessions explained in two different, very drastically different domains, how semantic web can, play a role in whether it is program analysis or whether it is in the machine materials domain. And this new genre of programming, which is AI plus ML plus semantic web, I can confidently say that it is here to stay for a very long time. And there's a lot of interesting work, and all your machine learning algorithms will become a lethal combination if you try to bring in the semantic web component into it. Now, time for our first poll. So there are multiple ways in which you can answer this poll question. If you have a mobile phone, please go ahead and scan that code through your scanner, or just type slido.com and enter the code as 8697, and you can poll. So I can see, okay, we are still getting some polls. Let's wait for a little while until we get all the results. Okay. Right. Can I move on, or are people still polling? So let's see, at the end of this session, hopefully, you'll be aware of a lot more applications, right? Okay, I can. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I can see that we have about moderate knowledge, moderate here in the sense that very few or none in India, partial knowledge of global implementations, right? So let's see, let's see how you feel at the end of the session. So we're now going to the second, what is the time, right? Okay, so what forms the components of a semantic web application? So let's go over one by one. So obviously the very first component is ontologies, right? So either you custom create, right? And we have seen multiple examples. Dr. Maya created a custom ontology of of those various hierarchical knowledge base on the software components. We saw custom knowledge base being created for the program analysis, or the kind of knowledge bases that Dr. Funny created from his lab. So we have to spend some amount of efforts in doing that. Prodigy is a good tool. Or if you are going to be using certain concepts which have already been defined and they're all well established, and some of them is linked open data cloud, linked open vocabulary, the w3.org. So a lot of people create the ontologies, create the vocabularies and publish it on w3.org, so that is available for everyone. So that's the first step, right? We have to create the ontology. The next step is to generate the instances. And we've again seen a lot of examples. I'll be sharing some examples from the kind of work that we are doing in our organization. So I have to generate the data semantics. So either we do it programmatically. There have been people who discuss they've done it by hand in the first iteration. You can either have a user interface to collect the information and convert it into the tuples and push it into a triple store. If it is, so entity disambiguation goes hand in hand with data semantics, because say, for example, you're trying to generate it from unstructured or structured text, then you have to do some amount of entity disambiguation or some form of knowledge base engineering. And when you do all that, you need to do something called ontology matching. Once we do that, so that's how you generate the instances. And then I have to manage this knowledge graph, right? It is not sufficient if you create it now first time. So you need to use either Sparkle inserts, selects are used to retrieve. You could do a bulk load. Many of these knowledge graphs will offer you the option of bulk loading your, tuples. Now, at this point in time, I think I should explain that the tuples can be expressed in various formats, right? RDF, Resource Description Framework, is one such format. You can also save your, all your tuples in the form of N-triples or NT files, as they're called. There are multiple such formalisms. So so bulk loads actually take in bulk all these triples, and then you can load it into your knowledge graph. In fact, if you I don't remember the speaker, but he spoke about downloading the DBpedia knowledge graph or the Yago knowledge graph, for instance, and then playing around with it. So they will offer you, they'll say that download this knowledge graph in the form of NT, and then .nt file, and then you go ahead, create your graph in whichever software that you're working in. Virtuoso is a good option. Virtuoso knowledge graph is a good option. You insert those, you get the tuples into the system by the bulk load option. And then periodically you need to prune or manage, because you could have created some duplicate entities, or you need to manage redundancies. Verification is a very important process. What do I mean? If you have an automated process that is generated, so as I said, that no process is 100% perfect. So you need to have some mechanism of verifying the tuples that you've generated, because if your tuples are not good enough, if they have gone and mapped to the wrong entity, say for example, from your vocabulary, then everything that you do further down is erroneous, right? So verification is very important. I then have to integrate the semantic intelligence. I've done all the hard work, but then why have I done all this? I've done this because this is going to help me. I do reasoning, apply rules, obviously apply some cool AI, ML plus semantic web algorithms. The whole thing comes together in this way, right? When you're actually creating a semantic web application for a real life use case, you need to have some form of a visualization layer. You can use any one of them, Angular, Ionic, or whatever. There is an application layer. I think we spoke about Owl Ready and all that, right? Python, Flask, and so on. So Python, Java-based, some program, some application layer we need. And of course, the persistent storage. So you have the Virtuoso open source, like I told you, or the OntoText. OntoText is a company whose database is called the GraphDB. Now, at this point in time, I would also bring to your notice that while an RDF triple store is also a graph database, there's a clear difference between an RDF triple store and a graph database. What is the difference? In a graph database, you just have, it's actually a labeled property graph. You have nodes which are connected by properties, and these nodes themselves, they don't have an RDF or OWL formalism. So it really means that those graph databases are not Sparkle compliant. So only an RDF triple store is Sparkle compliant, right? And the choice of whether you want to use an RDF triple store or you want to use a GraphDB is totally up to you, depending upon the application that you're trying to build. What is the business need? In the morning, if you remember, or yesterday or day before, there was a lady who said, how is Cypher different from Sparkle? I find using Cypher very easy. Now, Cypher is particularly for a database, for a graph database called Neo4j. It is not Sparkle compliant, right? If you're interested in doing reasoning, if you're interested in the description logic formalisms and so on, then you have to go for a RDF triple store. The graph databases do not have a querying standard. Every graph database comes with its own proprietary graph query language. Cypher is the proprietary language for Neo4j. Similarly, something else might have its own, but Sparkle is compliant with RDF triple store. So any database which is an RDF triple store has to be Sparkle compliant, right? So I hope that point got answered. Now let's move on and figure out. Let's figure out some semantic web applications from the industry. Now, I have put in a handful here, some points to note. I have specifically not added applications from organizations, so you would not find a TCS or an Infosys or a Accenture, Amazon, those people here, because organizations have dedicated their organizations to semantic web. That is their basis, their complete workflow. It is dedicated to semantic web or knowledge graph companies, right? So I have very specifically included only those organizations. Many of them here are more than a decade old, right? So people have actually invested that kind of time. So let's go over it one by one for you to get a feeling of what kind of applications are people building. And people have been here for more than a decade. So obviously there are customers who are interested in these solutions and they're finding some value proposition, right? So Pool Party is actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's an Austrian company. Now they are into the business of generating ontologies and knowledge bases for an organization. So they say that if an organization is working on a certain domain, they will engage with that organization. They have this product called Pool Party, which will map their domain into specific key terms, concepts, convert that into an ontology that is useful for that ontology, for that company's business. And they say that they will not reinvent the wheel. So if there are certain concepts that can be borrowed from already established vocabularies, they do that, right? So that's what Pool Party is about. And in the process, they also deliver self-servicing BI portals and business intelligence analytics portals and so on. Data.World is another example. It's a collaborative data integration platform. In fact, both Pool Party and Data.World have got trial logins. So I would urge all of you to go ahead and experience it, right? Now, Data.World says that if you want to play around with any of your data sets, say, for example, you have a data set for some census data of India, you want to load it on Data.World and see which other data sets does it connect to very intuitively, right? And Data.World also has its own repository of data. So it says it's a collaborative data platform. So I can create a data set, push it into the Data.World platform for other people to use. And it provides, so internally, the platform recognizes the context of every single data that is on the platform. And that's how it very intuitively or very intelligently suggests data sets depending upon your project needs. Open Data Soft is again very similar to Data.World. They so you can see in the same domain, you can see there are two different organizations competing in the same domain. Noema, I would say partially yes, partially similar to Data.World, but they are in the process of creating comprehensive sources of multiple domain information, right? So they are saying that we have the most comprehensive information on oil and gas domain. So if you have an application related to the oil and gas domain and you want to borrow an ontology or some key terms, please come use our knowledge base by all means, and you need to subscribe to their knowledge base, and then you're free to use all the efforts that they have put in to create comprehensive data sources. And they say that all these data sources, they keep keeping it up to date. So not only oil and gas, I think they have a lot of public information as well. So if you want to look at some governance data across the world, then they have pretty comprehensive knowledge bases. I'll come to Keynorm right at the end, right? Semantic AI. So here, semantic AI is more like a services kind of a model, where they say that given your business requirement, we will create a unique semantic model and create a semantic intelligence solution around it, right? So they are like a service provider in the semantic AI field. On2Text, we just spoke about it. On2Text is it's becoming very popular. It's an enterprise knowledge graph company, and their database is called GraphDB. And they say that GraphDB is also a triple store as well as a GraphDB. So you see, they're saying that we are trying to give you the best of both the domains. So if you want to use Sparkle, you can do that. If you want to treat your knowledge graph as a pure graph, so that you want to apply your graph traversal algorithms, right? Fastest search, or you want to say your betweenness centrality, closeness centrality, all those graph algorithms you want to apply, so onto text is saying that GraphDB is pretty good at that. Xenka, very similar to semantic AI that I spoke about. They're also offering enterprise knowledge graph solutions. Timber.ai converts your SQL data into a SQL knowledge graph. They're saying we allow you to harness all the context that we associate with all your disparate SQL tables, and then you have a common interface to do reasoning on your data. So they call it SQL knowledge graph. Effisoft is a document processing one. I haven't really checked that out, but they're saying if you have legal documents, you have financial documents, and then you want some intelligent document processing. So I guess they do a lot of NLP, extract entities, and then create a pretty extensive knowledge graph that can understand these documents and connect them. Kino is actually, when I look at their site now, it says that they have ceased operations temporarily. This is by a professor in Indian Institute of Science, Professor Partha Pratim Talukdar. I think this organization used to deal with a lot of genomic data, I understand. Although at the moment it seems that the organization has ceased customer operations. Right, so this is like trying to give you, and these organizations have been around for some time, right? People like Pool Party and all have been there since 2001. We're talking about 2 decades, these organizations, and they're all leaders in the space. Let's move on to life sciences. The reason I have included this is because this is one domain that is making the most use of semantic web, and you'll understand why, because it's so domain rich. You really can't have one human brain encapsulating all the knowledge that one needs to work in the life sciences domain. So very established, extremely extensive knowledge bases which are kept current by a community of bioscientists. We have the gene ontology called GO, which describes all the gene products, their molecular functions, cellular components. Bio2RDF, I'll explain how we are using Bio2RDF in a short while. So like I said, gene ontology was only one example that I took, but there is a disease ontology database. There's a phenotype genotype mapping database. And multiple such things, right? And Bio2RDF has actually integrated all these biomedical ontologies in one platform, which means with using one RDF query, I can actually have a federated result from all these different knowledge bases, and that's Bio2RDF. And CGC, the Cancer Genomics Cloud. So this is again a brilliant work where they have made the cancer genome database. That is, what are those genes, specific genes that are responsible for certain types of cancer, and they have created a knowledge graph out of that. And now suddenly the entire cancer data can now be searched, and actionable data can be pulled out of that particular knowledge base. The open biomedical and biological and biomedical ontology, again, we use that extensively. This is used to define biological terms. For example, if you want to create a patient class or a data observation class or something, you really should not be reinventing the wheel. You should be using the OBO ontology to do that. So what does that mean? In Protege, you import the OBO ontology, and then you use the context and properties from there. UMLS, very, very popular ontology. It's for the biomedical systems and services for maintaining electronic health records. So a lot of data in the US government, I'm told that it follows the UMLS ontology. In fact, it's mandated by the government to their electronic health records should be utilizing the UMLS. To such an extent that you have a journal of biomedical semantics. So there's a complete journal which is dedicated to the intersection of semantics and the biomedical domain. So what kind of research activities are happening currently? I tried to put as much as I can, and I hope I have covered as much possible. So let's go over one by one. your ontology alignment and matching. So this is an important problem where, you know, you have two or more different ontologies talking about the same concepts, right? I want to find out how similar are they, or, you know, in other words, I want to solve the semantic heterogeneity problem. If you remember, I said schema.org person and dbpedia.org person, both ontologies actually, both vocabularies refer to that person instance. So, like, you know, when there is so much of activity around ontologies happening, I would really want to consolidate and find out how two ontologies really align with each other. So there's a huge research happening in this area. How do I generate semantics? You know, this is the most hardest part in any form of semantic web application. How do I generate data? How do I generate semantics from raw data? My thesis also was in this area where, you know, I tried to figure out how to generate semantics from publicly available data sets. And this is a huge area of research, and we still, I guess, are still scratching the surface. This includes unstructured, structured, semi-structured data, ontology-based data access. So when you have the underlying, databases which are storing data in multiple formats, maybe RDBMS, maybe JSON, and so on, I understand my complete business from the domain perspective. So I have an ontology which is defining my domain. How can I access my data without really bothering about how my resources are distributed, how my backend databases or resources are distributed? I should be able to access my data purely based on the ontology. So if you remember, parts of this, slightly was discussed by Dr. Fani today. So from the domain, from a very human-like NLP, from those terms, the system converts it into a query, into a SPARQL query, first of all, to access the ontology. And then there is another engine that converts your, from after having discovered that these are the concepts and relationships involved, I have to convert them into respective queries that actually go and, get the data from the base resources. So again, a huge area of research. Ontology engineering. How do I generate my ontology from a seed input, right? So that's this one. Rules and reasoners. I think we said the more expressivity we add into an ontology, the more harder it gets to get to a reason. That is, if I try to reason with that knowledge base, it takes a lot of time. So you need to have a good balance of the expressivity in your ontology, and that's what this area, this area of research takes care. How do I optimize my reasoners? How do I, get the optimum amount of expressivity, and getting, building more expressive rules and reasoners. Question answering systems, efficient querying, they all, these things are kind of related. If you can see the OBDA, question answering systems, efficient querying. Semantic web resources. Every semantic web conference that you go to, there'll be a separate channel for resources. So somebody was asking in the audience, how do I create ontologies? Yes, first you figure out in which domain is there a need to create an ontology or a vocabulary, and then you contribute. Of course, there are some, there are certain conditions that you must have. They have to be interoperable. They, there are the 5-star that we talk about. So, and then you submit, and then you submit it to a particular place where then it starts to be taken by the global community. Natural language generation using ontologies, again, a very sought after, especially in life sciences, where clinical reports have to be generated, or in legal cases where, a summary report has to be generated. Can I use ontologies and accomplish my natural language generation? Ontology mediation, again, this is, you can probably relate it to that alignment and matching, where I have multiple ontologies talking about the same thing. I want to figure out, I want to reconcile the differences between these ontologies, and basically see, are they semantically interoperable? Can I, if to answer a question, can I really merge two ontologies to get the best? So this is like a spectrum of research work. As you can see, it's enough and more, and that's why I'm saying that we have a whole there's enough and more work that we have for the next few decades at least. Time for the second poll. I think the question should be up on your thing automatically. Which use cases domains are best suited for semantic web applications? You can select multiple. Please go ahead and poll. Yeah, I can see that, so mostly, as you can see, all the top 5 that you have mentioned, yes, very much. Transaction heavy applications, as long as there is a need to basically get some linkages to the domain, then yes, we don't see much applications there. But the remaining, very nicely put, yes, domain intensive applications, public data, academia, yes, SEO, yes, network. This is right. This is good. Right, I'm going to go ahead now. I have just about enough time to finish the second part of my presentation. So let's now get down to what kind of work are we doing, right? And I'm going to show you a series of applications that we are working on in Semantic Web India. So the first one that we're extremely proud of is we are actually building, this is a resource that we are building open source for the academic as well as the industry and the government officials. So this is called Bharati. It's the linked data vocabularies for the Indian context. So what does Bharati do? So if you were to look for information on on how to understand the governance data or public data that has been that is normally published by either data.gov.in or state governments or even central governments on the various portals, they all refer to some entity some entity which is belonging to our government. Things like they could be referring to administrative regions like states, districts, blocks, villages, towns, so on, smart cities. State governments, like you could have the Karnataka government, Andhra Pradesh government. Within a government, multiple organizations like the Department of Labor, and so on. Many sectors, you could have the education, labors, and then there are topics within the sectors. Now, what really happens is all of the data, wherever you find, they all talk about the same thing. But to kind of come to a conclusion that two different data sets are actually talking about the same thing, and hence I can merge that information and actually get to see a more comprehensive picture of whatever question that I want to address. For example, if I want to say, can I understand what is the situation of road accidents in the state of Karnataka vis-a-vis the state of Tamil Nadu, right? Now, there are multiple data sets you will find which are published by the government in multiple places. But to just answer the simple question, it is so hard, because you first have to collect all the data sets in one place. And in all possibilities, the various states and districts and all those in multiple data sets might not be referring to it with the same surface form. Surface form means, for example, it could be Bangalore in one place, Bengaluru urban in some other place, and so on. It is a humongous task to get all that information at one place. Not only that, if you wanted to answer the question of what is a local body in India, and what are the various classifications of a local body, what exactly are urban local bodies, what are rural local bodies, or even forget that. Suppose I want to know how many blocks are there in India, for example, or how many villages are there in India, how many towns. It's really hard. There is no one single place where I can get all this information. And we said, why don't we create a resource for India, where people get to understand the Indian context in a much better way, and at the same time it helps you to integrate all these multiple data sets using this resource. So we went ahead and picked up some credible resources. We went to GeoEye directory, and I'll show you some examples of how these things look. So I think I have. So this is a government website on the census codes of various states. The reason I'm saying about this is when you go for the census data sets, right? There is a good possibility that they will be referring to Jammu and Kashmir using state code 1, unless and until you know that 01 is the state census code of 2011 for Jammu and Kashmir. You cannot do anything with that data. You will have to do some processing that 1 means Jammu and Kashmir. And if there is some other data set which has Jammu and Kashmir data, you really have to do a lot of massaging and processing before you can get this information out. Similarly, if you look at this data set, this site, the Government of India directory, you can see that they've put up a lot of information. They're saying at the union government, you have apex bodies, ministries, and all that. Now, this information is not actionable. Suppose I really want to I want to say, show me all the data pertaining to ministries. If I wanted to do that, I really first have to create some form of a database that actually first of all creates my master list of all my ministries. And then when I connect with all my public data sets, and then I say which all data sets have got something for ministry, I can bring that out, right? So these are the kind of problems one faces. And we said, if we could attach a semantic context to the data, then we can really solve this problem. And that's what we did. Bharati, we generated Bharati from all these various data sets. How did we generate it? You must have seen part of the information that Dr. Maya spoke about. They looked at the Wikipedia. They looked at websites from Wikipedia. They extracted the information and then they mapped it. Something very similar. But what we did was, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We used entities from the LOD and LOV, things like organization ontology. Now, GeoNames is a very, very massive ontology that a particular. It's run by crowdsourced professionals. It has knowledge about 20 odd billion place names in all over the world, right? And I'll show you how we integrated Bharati with GeoNames. For all classifications, we used SCOS vocabulary. The data catalog definition itself, we use the data catalog vocabulary, and provenance. So today this information on GeoEye directory is of certain version. As obviously NIC is going to be updating information on this site. So when the information gets updated, I have to somehow say that, listen, now we are at version number such and such. And unless and until I show this provenance, the credibility of our resource is not going to be there, right? So we used ProvO, which is the provenance ontology, to build that. And what we really got was this massive knowledge graph in this fashion. And this is like the internals of how Bharati works. So these are the various concepts and how they are related. Let me show you a demo of Bharati, right? Now, the thing is, let's understand this. So suppose I write something like Chandigarh, right? Now, if I found Chandigarh in one of the data sets, it is like saying Chandigarh is what? Chandigarh is a union territory. Chandigarh is also a city. Chandigarh is also a district, right? Now, before I attach Chandigarh to the right, I have to attach Chandigarh to the right classification, even before I can start processing the data. What if Chandigarh was in the context of districts of so then the kind of information that I'm going to store is drastically different from Chandigarh, the smart city. So now if you search for such an information like this, now it says, I understand Chandigarh as all these different classifications. And if you particularly go and search for Chandigarh, it gives you a lot of information. It says its alternate name is this, its abbreviation is here. The census code as of 2011 was 4 in both the census years. This was the classification. It also says that there are these sub organizations, right? So Chandigarh as a state has got these there is a district and there is a smart city. There are these governments, bodies under Chandigarh, whether it is the form of a state apex body or state department. Now suddenly what has happened is Chandigarh is no longer just a set of characters. So if when I go and link my public data to Chandigarh, it now really understands what that entity means. And if I said, show me all the data that you had about all the states and union territory, it will go and rightly pick up only those data sets that talk about Chandigarh as a union territory. Not only that, let's this is only about this is about so let's look at, say, the agriculture department, right? Likewise, we converted even all the government organizations on NIC to do this. And see, it shows you a hierarchy. It says under the government there is a state government called Chandigarh, and within that there is a state department called the agriculture department. Now this is like a resource. You can go ahead go ahead and search Bharati. We have filled up as much information. For example, we show what is the statistics of what all have we stored in Bharati. You can download, very important, you can download both the schema and knowledge graph. Go ahead, load it into a Virtuoso graph, and you can play around with it. We tell you what are all the data sources that we have used. Not only that, if you wanted to get some technical information about the usage of Bharati, we explain how the knowledge graph has been created, what all ontologies have been used to create this, what are all the resources that are available for you. It tells you the vocabulary metrics. And most importantly, please go ahead, because we really need help to evaluate and tell us what all can we do with Bharati. We've already started to get a lot of benefits by linking Bharati to some of the work that we are doing. There is a feedback form. Please use it, and then let us know how we can improve it. There's a user manual as well for you to go through. So this is regarding Bharati. That's a resource that we built. Now some applications, right? So we said, can we build a platform which converts your individual data silos into a network of knowledge? And Sandhi actually stands for semantic network for knowledge, derived from a Sanskrit word, where Dhi is knowledge and Sandhi is actually union. And this is what we are pitching to a lot of our organizations. And we implemented Sandhi for COVID datasets. There was a time when a lot of COVID-19 datasets were being pushed by different state governments and of course across the world. We said, can we use this to link all these various datasets into a semantic graph and see what is the advantage that we get. So what really happens is all these data silos we build. So we have an ontology. We have created a Sandhi ontology which goes and attaches a contextual a context or a temporal context or a resource context to each of these files. Mind you, we don't touch the data sets, right? We don't touch the data sets. So and then when you go ahead and retrieve the data, it suddenly gives a lot of insights. And I'm going to demonstrate Sandhi COVID for you now. And Sandhi COVID, okay, just a second. Yeah, here is Sandhi COVID. And I'm going to quickly take you to a very interesting demo, because I think I want to cover so many other applications that we're working on. So let's say, let's look at, let's go to the state of Haryana. Let's go to the state of Haryana and particularly select the district of Kurukshetra. And see, what am I saying? So what have I done? What have we done? So all these disparate data sets that came in, right? We linked Kurukshetra to a Bharati entity of Kurukshetra. So it understands that, this particular word Kurukshetra is actually the district Kurukshetra within Haryana. And because we have linked this Bharti entity to a GeoNames entity, now suddenly Kurukshetra, with absolutely no effort from our side, has a lat and long and other location type properties attached to it. Right now, I can say within say 100 kilometer of Kurukshetra. So it will immediately show me these are all the areas within 100 kilometers of Kurukshetra, and say I select a few, and I say, okay, for these places, can you show me in the last 1 month what has been the scenario of confirmed COVID cases? Right now, if you see what has really happened is, all we did was whatever data came in, we aligned the data set, which was a raw data set, to the Bharti entities, which are semantic entities, and the rest, just happened by magic, because we also, because every entity is attached to a GeoNames entity, and hence this drop down that you saw came purely from the other place. And this is where I told you that, depending upon your need, if I had not wanted, if my aim was to just build a localized application of figuring out something about some aspect of Kurukshetra, which is very local, then I don't really have to go in for a semantic web application. But if I'm wanting to harness the semantics part of that entity, then semantic web plays a huge role. Now, this gap don't get affected by it. Some of the data sets don't come in very regularly, so I guess there was a huge break in this time frame where the data sets didn't come in. But you can see, that probably Panipat and the blue line Karnal are really high with COVID cases at the moment, as on 29th, right? So there is still, and let me just quickly show you what is the time. Yeah, I have enough time. So I just want to show you another aspect here. Now, we also linked the event ontology. So there is an event ontology that links space, time, and some event. So if we wanted to say, for example, so these are we populated the event ontology using these various events. So if I want to see the difference between lockdown 2 and say lockdown 5, say lockdown 5 was the first unlock version 1.0, right, which was put in place from, I think it started somewhere from June or something, when they started to unlock the restrictions. Now, if I say that, okay, show me how the COVID data analyzes between these two disparate events, and once again, what has happened is we have merged the event ontology with again the information from the raw data, and I say take a date range of 10 days after, and let's stick with this Andhra Pradesh, the top states, and now we get to see how the scenario changed when there was lockdown 2.0 in place and lockdown 5.0. You can see there's a drastic change, right? There was the cases were very much under control, and here we are talking about lakhs, right? The cases are in lakhs. So these kind of things where just by introducing a little bit of semantics, your data sets start to talk to you, start to talk to you very intelligently, right? So this is semantic Sandhi COVID, and I just wanted to show you some part of just one quick demonstration on, I think, the public data, right? How to see Bharti in action again. Now, I think. Look at public data. Now see what has happened, right? So we have downloaded a whole lot of some 50 to 60 data sets. We downloaded from data.gov.in. They're all they're all raw CSV files, and by just associating the data semantics, by ingesting semantics on those files using Bharti, if I said show me all the data sets, say belonging to Andhra Pradesh, right, and I apply this filter. Can you see it has pulled out 3 very different data sets: Visakhapatnam, Amravati, work and sanitation. And now, if you notice, the file title does not have Andhra Pradesh anywhere. There is nothing to indicate that these files are belonging to Andhra Pradesh, not even inside your data, right? But how did it figure out that these are related to Andhra Pradesh? That's because the program or our model now looks at Visakhapatnam not just as a series of characters, but it understands that Visakhapatnam is a city in Andhra Pradesh. And hence, if somebody is requesting for some information from Andhra Pradesh, I should be showing all of this, right? And just maybe one more example, if you look at Gujarat, once again, you will see whole lot of information coming from all parts of Gujarat, where there is nowhere indicating that these data sets are belonging to Gujarat, but yes, the data actually belongs to Gujarat, right? So these are the kind of, and this is what we are trying to pitch to our customers. They're slowly getting there, and a lot of people have shown, a lot of interest, and we hope to build Bharati very extensively, and in a manner that people use it in all aspects. So that was about Sandhi. Now, Sandhi, gene variant analysis, this is a very different domain, and we got into the life sciences domain specifically because of the rich application of semantic web in this area. Okay. So here, the problem, let me just tell you what the problem was. So there are multiple people who get their DNA sequenced, right? And they get their DNA sequenced to find out, are they predisposed to a specific genetic disease? And this idea we proposed to Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. We said that from various, DNA sequence information, we call them variance annotations in the bioinformatics world. We should be able to tell you specifically whether that particular person is predisposed to a disease. Now, do such applications exist? Of course they exist. In the West, there are tons and tons of applications that do this. But in India, unfortunately, nobody has attempted to build a knowledge base for the Indian context. What do I mean? So today, if you went for your DNA sequence analysis, your DNA is going to be mapped or kind of compared with Caucasian population, because the Caucasian population, there are enough databases and there are enough pointers to tell you which gene variants affect what. But ideally we should be having something for the Indian population, and that's what we are hoping to build. And we were selected by them. We are currently mentored and incubated by CCMB. This project is of duration 1 year. This is a very interesting application again, and there's another application that found use for Bharati. So this problem statement came from Capgemini. They said, we want an application where especially the women citizens of India, they can, using a very simple interface, use their mobile phones and tell which areas are safe in various parts of a city. And somehow, can we crowdsource this information and give them enhanced information about how safe is their zone? And we said, and one of the requirements was that can you augment it with leverage public data? And immediately we jumped in, because Bharati found a use case here, and we are in the final rounds at the moment. We're hoping to get a favorable result from them. But it's what it does is from all these individual records, which are just kind of text statements, and the map information, we map it to a Bharati entity. So we know exactly which ward the person is going around at any place, at any point in time, if the person is in a urban area, or we know exactly which village or town the person is if the person is in a rural area. And we know in that particular area which is the local government which is working. So actually, with this application, you can give out very, very information, very useful information for the public authorities to take some action. So even for the person, if I was going through, say, Banashankari area in Bangalore, I would know how safe is my ward, I can even go a little bit further and say how safe is my district, or how safe is my zone, and so on and so forth. And more than that, compare across districts and so on and so forth. So this is Samraksha. I think I'm almost coming to the end of my talk. I've picked up, this is right from day one, Dr. Sarika had put up, and I was fascinated by this one slide of hers, which said, data on its own might not be very useful, but if you attach context, it becomes information, useful information. Of course, it is guided by the goals of the business. You need to add value, you need to add meaning, and finally, it becomes knowledge when the information gets transformed into a self-learning knowledge graph and augmented by rules, reasoning, and all that. And that's precisely what Semantic Web India hopes to do. We are very passionate about meaningfully connecting data to enable businesses and people with valuable insights. Our final poll for today. What do you think is the most important task in the conversion of raw data into a knowledge graph? Right. I think I consider my talk highly successful. I wanted to see a high percentage on option one, which I see. I'm extremely happy. And as promised, I am leaving slightly more than 10 minutes for questions. I will answer as many questions as possible to the best of my ability. Thank you once again, Dr. Sarika, for giving me this opportunity. I have thoroughly enjoyed presenting this talk to you, and I hope you all had some takeaways from my session.
Thank you, Dr. Rasha, for such a fascinating talk, I should say. And I believe that the participants also enjoyed it, and they will definitely try using semantic technologies now. I think we have to look into the chat to look for the.
I'll open it. I'll try and open this.
Can I have some learning resources for already?
Sorry, repeat the question again, please.
Can I have some learning sources for already?
Oh yeah, sure. First of all, there are enough sources available on the web, but still, if you need help on what to do, I think all of you would have noted down my all of you would have noted down my email ID. Please feel free to get in touch. If you face trouble using it, I'll be more than happy to help you. Okay, I noticed that today when I have presented Bharati and all that, I have used our development environment. It's okay. You guys can obviously go ahead and use it, but I'll try and give you all the links. Some of them have production versions. Bharati is already live. I'll try and give you the production IDs. Also, if you feel like playing around with the Bharati knowledge base, I'll give you the link to our Virtuoso knowledge base along with some guidance on how to use the sparkles. Go ahead and just play with Bharati.
Is semantic AI and explainable AI same?
See, I would say no. Explainable AI is I would say if I were to draw a Venn diagram, explainable AI is a subset of semantic AI. Semantic AI is basically all your algorithms, right? All your AI and ML algorithms where you use any form of algorithms to understand patterns from data. Now, what you are trying to do is augmenting those data patterns with some ontology, so that the same data now gets some semantics attached. Now, what happens is you will be able to refine your algorithms, or maybe your machines will automatically be able to refine the algorithms to a large extent, because now the data has the context part as well. So that's what semantic AI tries to bring in. So it tries to bring in the semantic and the algorithm part together.
Is ontology engineering there is a term ontology in ontology engineering there is a term ontology cost estimation. How we can do this cost estimation?
I'll try to ontology cost estimation. I think, see, if you remember Dr. Funny's talk today, he said the more depth in the ontology, right? If you have to reach your leaf in 7 to 8 levels of depth, then obviously there's a cost to answering such queries, right? When you try to reason with such a knowledge base, it is going to have some effect in the way the time it's going to take, or the query is going to take to come out with a result. So I think this is the domain of that cost optimization, if I'm not mistaken. I do not know if there is somebody else who can, some other expert who's in the call now who can add on to it.
Dr. Funny is already there. If he like to speak something.
Yeah, I can't say much more. Asha Subramanian, the speaker, I shouldn't say much because I'm a beginner in this. I can only mention saying that currently there is a belief that it's difficult to predict how much compute time is necessary once you start doing the reasoning, because there are situations when it can take very long time. You cannot predict it upfront because of the open world assumption that we take. So I don't think it's an easy question to answer.
Actually, there is OntoCom model similarly to COCOMO for cost estimation of ontologies. OntoCom is also available for cost estimation. So we could do with that also.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can I ask this question again? Actually, what I need to ask in this.
Yeah.
Actually, there's the ontology cost estimation model that is already there in the ontology engineering, that is OntoCom. But I just want to know this thing. After building the ontology, shall we estimate the cost of an ontology, or we need to, because after building the ontology, there are concepts, there are entities, there are different properties are there that we need to design for an ontology. So how we can estimate the cost actually before building that ontology, because estimation means we need to just estimate, we cannot find out, actually we cannot calculate the cost, because after building we can calculate the cost, that is fine, because for estimation that means we need to estimate it before that, before building an ontology. So is that the part of initial level concept, or after building an ontology we need to do that?
I'm really sorry. I have drawn a complete blank. I can't answer this question. I don't think I'm competent enough to answer this question, but it's a good question. Maybe I should go and do some literature survey on this.
Let me speak for a few seconds on it. Sonika, it is something like, yes, you have rightly said estimation is something that should be done beforehand.
Yes.
But actually complete cost calculation cannot be done. That is why it is also called estimation itself.
Okay, yes.
In that manner, they are calling it estimation, but they mean cost calculation only.
Okay. So that means after building only we can estimate the cost, right?
Yeah. After building only you are estimating it. It's nothing like feasibility study you do for software. It's nothing like that.
Okay, there are two very interesting questions. Saransh Tiwari has asked how to resolve incorrect linking of entities and KGs. So, Saransh, it's like this. It's a very valid problem. And what we do is at the end of every time, so before you deploy the algorithm, right, you obviously will test it well. So you will have a training data set, test data set. You will have a clue about the accuracy of the algorithm that you have deployed to do the linking, right? And even after that, you can never get 100% correct, right? So in our case, we have allowed a manual intervention. So we have allowed a manual intervention where post the linking, people can go ahead, look at the linking that has happened, and then change it if required. So there has to be some form of manual intervention in the process.
Yeah, ma'am. Sorry. Actually, sometimes I found in the when I'm searching the query on Google, then this query is resolved now. Before few months, I have searched who was the CEO in 2013. So it was returned in text and the Rubin, but in figure, the current CEO picture was different. Sundar Pichai was showing. So it was a incorrect linking. The name was anti-routing, but the picture was Sundar Pichai. So it is incorrect linking. Is there any role behind this of deep learning or machine learning? Because for the knowledge extraction, supervised and unsupervised learning are running, but they are sometimes they linking incorrect entities. So
yeah, because as I mentioned, as I mentioned, we can never get that 100% accuracy, right?
Yeah.
So that's the so there is some error which has creeped in, correct?
Okay. Thank you.
May I know the difference between mapping? May I know the difference between mapping, matching, and alignment? Mapping, matching, and alignment. Okay. Alignment, I know from the context of when you align two ontologies. So if you have certain concepts in a particular ontology, we want to know which is the best concept that it aligns with in another ontology, right? So that is the ontology alignment part. So again, I'm talking from a context, from some context, right? So matching can be used in many different ways, right? So please go.
They are the same. What he is asking actually, when we do mapping of two ontologies or alignment of two ontologies, so many researchers have used these three terms interchangeably. Here is the confusion. So it's the same whether we call ontology mapping or matching or alignment. But it depends whether you are doing a T-box alignment or you're doing an A-box alignment. Whether you are doing concept matching or you are doing instance matching. So those are two different concepts internally. Otherwise, these three are the same terms. Sairaj, is that fine for you?
Ma'am, I have one more query, ma'am.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Related to T-box matching, I'm working, ma'am. For T-box matching, it refers to ontology matching or mapping, ma'am. And what is the difference between these three terms in the context of T-box mapping?
As far as I know, they are the same. All the three terms have been used interchangeably by the researchers. They mean the same. You can use anyone with your preference.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
If we look at the chat box, I think the queries are no more there.
Yeah, correct.
So the participants can jump in and ask the queries if they wish so, and they are left with any of them.
Madam, is there any algorithm for a reasoner, or how do I get all the information regarding the reasoner?
See, if when we started work on reasoner, so we followed the Apache Jena reasoner, right? And I think multiple people, I think Dr. Fani mentioned about pellet reasoner. Now, if you look at it, they actually tell you exactly how to form your rules and how to go about reasoning. But those are basic ones, right? And then depending upon the way your problem has been, the way you have defined the problem, then you have to tweak in and add, meat to that particular program to make it work the way you want. So those simpler reasoning and rule statements have to be converted into a complex program that does what the business needs. So as a beginner, you could start with the Apache Jena reasoner. They have explained very beautifully how to create the rules and how to go about doing those basic reasonings, like if A implies B, B implies C, then A implies C, stuff like that, right? We can start with rules such as those.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, I hope people are done with it. And if some can switch on the videos, we like to take a snapshot, a screenshot. Thank you so much. Some of you have already switched on the videos. Abhishek, may I ask you to take appropriate screenshots?
Yes, ma'am, I'm taking it.
Keep taking cue in every session if possible. Thank you everyone. Thanks to the beautiful audience and thanks to Dr. Asha. Thanks to Dr. Fani Kumar who was there with us in this session also. And we are obliged for that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So let us join.
Thank you.
Let us join back tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Dr. Raghava will be here with us. And Sparkle, now you know well why do we use Sparkle and how will be told by Raghava tomorrow. And after Raghava is done, Dr. Mr. Arindam Chatterjee from Wipro will join us and will explain what is explainable AI and how we can do it. But he will be having again only 90 minutes. So in 90 minutes, he'll try to touch upon the boundaries the best he can. This is what he shared with me. So thank you everyone. Thanks for being such a patient audience. Thank you and bye-bye for now.
Thank you, ma'am.